ago, in a land of cold, of ice, and of snow. The days here are short, and the nights here are long. But if you thought no creature could live here, you'd be wrong. There, now you see them, those figures growing near, the unmistakable shape of a herd of reindeer. They warily wander, day in and day out, searching for food on this well-travelled route. Notice that small one, trailing behind. His name is Wren. Just keep that in mind, for the life of young Wren here is destined to change, when an action so innocent caused an outcome so strange. For Wren looked down, and he saw in his path the greenest and juiciest thick clumps of grass. Now, this was most odd for this time of year. In the heart of the winter, grass was never found here. Even odder still was its colour against the snow, such a brilliant green that it almost seemed to glow. But Wren was not one to question good fate. Besides, it had been so very long since he last ate. So he greedily gobbled the grass from the ground, but no sooner had he swallowed when he heard an awful sound, a sound from within him, somewhere deep inside, then a whooshing and a gurgle and a pain in his side. "Wait!" he called to the rest of the herd. "Help!" he called again, but he choked on the word. "Please don't leave me," he whimpered out into the air, but his family kept moving, unaware of his despair. Soon they were gone, out of sight and far away, and the wind was growing wilder, and the sky began to grey. Wren had to keep moving. He had to reach his pack, but the weather still grew fiercer, and the sky was soon pitch black. He stumbled in the darkness for as far as he could go, but his legs were growing weary, and the ground was thick with snow. Ice was clinging to his antlers. Now poor Wren could hardly see, so he dragged his aching body to a stillness by a tree. He curled up beneath the branches to shelter from the storm. But then the strangest thing occurred. A voice he could have sworn was coming from the darkness, and it sounded bright and warm.
"Wren,"
the voice came sounding.
"there's no need to be afraid. You've done so much and come so far and been so very brave. Now rest here, little reindeer. Nestle down within my roots and know that I will keep you safe. I give my word to you."
The tree stood tall above him, and Wren found comfort in its words. So he lay beneath the branches, and very soon he was submerged in a deep and restful slumber, undisturbed but much deserved. And the minutes turned to hours, and the hours turned to days, and the days turned years, turned centuries, and still he didn't wake. And as the years kept marching, still the deer's protector stood, a loyal, unflinching sentinel, a guardian of wood. But all around the world was changing, for now man had arrived, and he built a concrete jungle twisting up into the sky, and the bricks rose ever higher, and a smog soon choked the air. But the people kept on building, and Wren slept through it unaware. Metal monsters flattened mountains and spewed oil into the sea. All the greenness died and disappeared, save the solitary tree. And the earth kept getting hotter, but the people didn't care. They just kept on pouring concrete, building castles in the air. Then a fateful day came calling, when the tree could do no more. The men approached it swiftly with a freshly sharpened saw. In no time at all they gave the call, and the tree fell to the floor. Now all this noise, heat and commotion had stirred Wren from his sleep. He blinked the light into his eyes and rose slowly to his feet. this wasn't where he'd led to rest. This just wasn't right at all. What were these things with mouths agape? And these structures all so tall? "My God!" one of the creatures spoke. "A reindeer!" they cried again. "I thought they died out long ago. Quick, don't let it get away." Poor Wren was frozen to the spot. This land he didn't know. Where were the fields of evergreens? The mountains tipped with snow? He stomped his hooves, and he reared his head, and bellowed out a warning. But the people wouldn't be deterred. A mighty crowd was forming. They ran at him with chains and ropes, and there was nothing Wren could do. They drove a spike into the ground to keep him there subdued. And the people came from miles around to see the captured beast. How they marvelled at this creature they believed was long deceased. But the people in their greed and in their hating of the earth would soon be taught a lesson they could not afford to learn. For Wren heard a sound within him, then let out a racking wheeze, then a whooshing and a gurgle and an almighty sneeze. And Wren remembered what he'd eaten so long ago and far away, that juicy green thick clump of grass in the snow that fateful day. And all around him a commotion, people falling to their knees, for the reindeer they had woken up was riddled with disease. And now the people were terrified. They turned around and fled, but as they ran they took it with them, just causing it to spread. But they kept on running blindly. They just couldn't get ahead. The plague pervaded all the land, and all the people fell down, dead. Wren watched on in horror as the bodies piled high. He didn't know he had this sickness. He didn't want them all to die. But the sickness was unwavering in its solitary goal. It wouldn't, couldn't, didn't stop till it killed every living soul, every mother, every daughter, every lover, every son, every father, every doctor, every person, everyone. And then there was a silence. Not a whisper, not a sound, besides the whimper of a reindeer tied to a spike within the ground. And the minutes turned to hours, and the hours turned to days. Wren lay down and closed his eyes, and death carried him away. And this is where we leave him, with that chain around his neck. No happy ending here, you say? Well, we're not done just yet. Because time kept moving forward, in that funny way it does, and beside the reindeer's body soon there grew a tiny bud. And the bud became a flower, and the flower sprouted seeds, and the seeds were carried far and wide and scattered by the breeze, and they cracked apart the concrete, and they blossomed into trees. And the air became much clearer, and the rivers and the seas, and before too long the world was green again. The man-made things all gone. The insects and the fish returned, and birds took flight with song. And perhaps one day, in years to come, the people will return, and perhaps they will be kinder, with more willingness to learn what the planet Earth can teach them, and the wonders that it holds, and perhaps they'll love each other, and be united in one goal. They'll look after every creature on this rock that we call home, and the people then will flourish, and the temperature won't rise, the ice won't melt, the trees won't burn, and smoke won't cloud the skies. And it will all just be a story, just a memory way back when, on a cold and frosty tundra, lived a reindeer known as Wren.
Once upon a time, way up north, in the north of the north, even norther than that, there was a great white land. Marvelous mountains tower over vast tundras. Stretching out until they meet the icy crystal waters of a great lagoon. Beyond these deep, dark waters lies a narrow spit of land. It is here that the people of Nanukai call home, where their ancestors made roots and learned to tend the land, shielded from the might of the sea by miles upon miles of thick sea ice which surrounds the entire shore. Over time, the tents and igloos of Nanukai gave way to structures made of wood and iron. Nestled in the heart of the village, among the pastel-faded houses and corrugated roofs, is where our story begins. This is the home of Chet, the greatest whale hunter in the village, his wife Hannah, the greatest caribou hunter in the village, their son Saya, and their beloved sled dog, Suki. Saya and Suki were inseparable, ever since a fateful day when Saya was just 7 years old. Suki had scared away an enormous polar bear with jet black eyes and a blood-stained muzzle. Today they can often be found racing around the village on a sledge, causing mischief wherever they go. Early one morning, though the sky was black as night, for it was winter, Saya woke with a start. He realised Suki was nowhere to be seen. He crept out of bed, being careful not to wake his parents. He put on his father's coat and walked outside. His voice rang out into the darkness, and Suki came bounding up. Saya thought about trudging back up to his room, but the cold morning air had already cleared his foggy head, so he decided to head out to the edge of the sea ice to watch the sunrise over the vast ocean. Together they made their way through the snow, past the post office, the airstrip, and the last row of houses, being careful to give Malakai's tent a wide berth. Malakai is the oldest and wisest man in the village. He seemed impossibly old to Saya. He was old even when Saya was young. The lines of his face were deep set, like those left behind by a sledge in heavy snowfall. But despite his age, he still insists on sleeping in a humble sealskin tent overlooking the sea. Saya and Suki came to a stillness on the edge of the sea ice and looked out over the water. All was black as tar, though in the sky 1,000 stars pierced the black, pinpricks to another world. Saya reached into his father's coat pocket and found a packet of cigarettes. All was calm and still. Everything that is besides Suki, who was lurching to and fro around Saya's feet. He told her to sit, but Suki's frustration only grew. He told her to heel, to sit, to calm down, but Suki wouldn't listen, and still her agitation grew, snarling, growling, almost knocking Saya off his feet. Suddenly, Suki leapt into the sea. She dived down deep underwater into the pitch-black depths, out of sight, and splash, she was back, and splosh, she was gone, again out of sight. Saya desperately searched for her, almost losing his footing himself. She was there, now she was gone, when suddenly Suki burst through the sea ice. But the dog standing before Saya was a very different one to the one who had dived in. Suki was the most vibrant shade of orange. Saya turned around to look at the crashing sea. To his surprise, the whole ocean was orange. He crouched down next to Suki. She didn't seem terribly concerned about her orange coat. Saya scooped up a handful of snow and began rubbing it into Suki's fur, but try as he might, he couldn't get her clean. Saya hastily stuffed the cigarettes into his father's coat and headed back home. They trekked back past Malachi's tent, the first row of houses, the airstrip, and the post office. But as they got closer to home, Saya noticed Suki slow down and begin lagging behind him. Her gaze seemed vacant. She was making sounds Saya had never heard before, a rattling wheeze that echoed off the corrugated rooftops. Saya cooed at her to keep up. But Suki groaned, and her legs buckled, sending her crashing into the snow. Saya dropped to his knees and desperately tried to wash her down with the snow once more, handful after handful, until his hands were red and numb from the cold. He turned towards his cabin and screamed with all the noise he could muster. Saya's world seemed to move in slow motion. He saw the lights flick on in his home. He heard his parents race out into the morning towards him. But it was too late. He held Suki's head in his arms and gazed into her gentle blue eyes. And they spoke to him in a language older than words. As he held her, she grew heavy in his arms. Her final breath escaped her and turned to mist, carried off by the wind. Through his sobs, Saya tried his best to explain what had happened. His mother held him tightly as his father ran to the edge of the sea ice to find Malachi already looking out. Malachi didn't come home for 3 nights after he had seen the orange sea. They say he just stood there, solid as a rock, cold as ice, staring out to the horizon. On the 4th day, Malachi returned to the village. He said the Orange Sea was a bad omen and that the people should be scared. That night, Malachi died. And Saya cried and cried and cried. Some say his tears washed the bad orange away, for soon the water was clear, azure blue, whaling season.
High up in the Himalayan mountains lies India's Ladakh region, the highest cold desert in the world. For centuries, mountain people have lived at these altitudes in harmony with nature, relying on the cycles of the earth to sustain them. Very little rain falls on this region, so the people rely solely on fresh water stored in huge glaciers on the sides of the mountains. In the winter months, snowfall turns to ice on top of the mountains, until springtime comes and the snow melts, streaming down the mountain into the rivers that run like the veins of the region, providing water for the villagers to plant their crops. In the summer, where the sun is at its hottest and the snow has all but melted, the villagers turn to the glaciers to sustain them. Huge stores of ice which melt gradually throughout the season, providing water to the land. And this is how it was for many years. The harshness of the land made livable through the ancient way of the mountains, an intricate dance between man and nature, passed down through generation after generation of Ladakhi families. They are people rich in culture, who build monasteries, sing, dance and worship. But each year of late, the snow has been melting earlier and earlier, and the glaciers have been receding further and further up the mountain into the coldest heights, and therefore melting later and later. The farmers planted their crops earlier and earlier, and the crops yielded less and less. "How can we feed our families with so little water?" exclaimed Farmer Tenzin as they returned home with their meagre offerings. They knew that soon the river would run dry, and the crops would perish. The people grew hungry, but persevered. They ate less, and shared what they could with those most in need. But they were powerless to the invisible enemy surrounding them. By late that summer, the rapidly melting glaciers caused the river to burst its banks, sending a flash flood surging through the land. It washed away everything in its path: buildings, fields, and homes. Many people died, and some were never found. The villagers were at their breaking point. No matter what they did, they were vulnerable to the whims of some great power beyond their grasp. They huddled together by the enormous stupa in the center of the village and began to pray for guidance. It was then that something came to one of the villagers, an engineer named Sonam Wangchuk. As he gazed up at the towering stupa, he imagined it to be made of ice, their own man-made glacier, providing water for the whole village. Sonam excitedly recalled his vision to the people around him. He explained from his knowledge of geometry that a cone of ice would melt slowly. Unlike a flat sheet, the sun would be unable to reach its core. He also knew that water always keeps its level. If they could run pipes from high up in the river where it flowed freely to the village lower down, then the water would shoot out the top of the pipe and freeze in the bitterly cold winter winds without the need for any energy or machines. And so the next winter, the village put Sonam's idea to the test. They gathered together to bury the pipes, trailing up the side of the mountain. They weaved branches and wire around the base of the would-be stupa to allow the ice to cling to it. Finally, one day deep in the heart of winter, in the dead of night when the temperatures were at their coldest, they turned on the tap. They braced themselves, and for a moment, nothing happened. Sonam could hardly bear to watch his great idea fall apart. He thought of the disappointment it would bring, and the hunger that would follow. Just as it seemed all hope was lost, water suddenly burst through the pipe, shooting high into the air with tremendous force. As it fell back to earth, it froze on impact with the skeleton they had built. As the cold winds blew through the structure, ice began to form, like flesh clinging to bone. It was a sight to behold. The villagers stayed up all night long, huddling together against the bracing cold, watching the stupa grow and grow. In the morning, there was a towering mountain of ice standing before them in the heart of the village. Before long, a holy man from the largest monastery in Ladakh heard tell of the stupa's success. He travelled to Sonam's village to see it for himself. Overcome with adoration for the villagers' strength of will in saving themselves from the brink, the monk blessed the monument. The people adorned it with prayer flags of all different colours. They sang, danced, and celebrated their achievement. And when spring came, there was bountiful water to go around. The farmers were able to grow barley and wheat again, and for the first time in history, they grew apricots too. But Sonam was not yet content. His village was thriving, but throughout Ladakh, others still struggled. And so, along with His Holiness the monk, they set out to spread the word. Everyone pulled together to build as many stupas as they could across the mountain villages. Each grew bigger than the one before. Villagers worked hand in hand with soldiers, students, farmers, artists, and even monks. And together they taught children, passing on the knowledge to the next generation. Before long, there were great fields of ice stupas, and the ground was rich and fertile. They planted trees, and the harvests were plentiful. What was once an arid desert was now a luscious green oasis, teeming with life once more.
Hello people of the world, we are today gathered in this small village of Tarchit in the Indian Himalayas, Ladakh. It's a sad story in the mountains. With climate change, our glaciers are melting away, the only source of water. But today we are here not to mourn, but to celebrate human effort and ingenuity, whereby people have made their own artificial baby glaciers using nothing but gravity and geometry. They have frozen the winter water when there is no farming to make cones of ice, and because of the geometry, when all the ice and snow is gone by March, this stupa baby glacier lasts till mid-July now. However, these are not things we can brag about or boast about. We cannot actually solve our problems without your help, people in the big cities. It's your behavior and lifestyle that is actually causing the climate change. And therefore, we have today also gathered to convey our message to the world to please live simply, so we may simply live. Therefore, the villagers here give you a message in our language. Nyeja pasmo juksna. Nyeja pasmo juksna. Please live simply. Thank you very much. Jule.